We're in the Gemara towards the bottom of Samach Amud Beis, holding where it says the first wide line, Idbaya Lahu. This is another question regarding the Korban Pesach. We learned yesterday that a Korban Pesach could be brought before the time. If it's brought as a shlamim, so then it'll be a shlamim. If it's brought as a Korban Pesach, so then it's going to be pasul, because it's a Korban Pesach brought not in the right time. So here the Gemara has another question regarding this Korban Pesach that's brought before its time. Yibayilu, the question was asked. Pesach sheshachtoi b'shar yemois hashana. This Pesach was shechted one of the other days of the year, b'shinui bailim. And the intention the person had was he's shechting it not for its owner. This is one of the things that usually makes a Korban Pesach pasul. By other karbanis, it also will make the korban something that will not work for the owner, that he has to bring the korban again. But by Korban Pesach, it will actually make it pasul. Just like the kavana of shaloi lishma makes the Korban Pesach pasul. So, the question is, what does the shinui bailim do to this Korban Pesach that's brought shaloi bizmanai? Do I say kishinui kaidesh, shinui bailim, kishinui kaidesh dami? The fact that his intention is for a different owner. It's similar to when he has an intention for the Korban shlamim umachsher, and it makes it kosher, just like when you bring the Korban Pesach shaloi bizmanai, and you have a mind for the Korban shlamim, that actually makes it kosher. So too I would say that if you brought the Korban Pesach shaloi bizmanai and you had a mind for a different owner, not for the right owner, so then it would make it kosher as well. Oiloi, or perhaps not. You have to have in mind that it should be for a Korban shlamim in order to change the status of the Korban Pesach. Essentially, the Gemara's question is, what is it that makes a Korban Pesach shaloi bizmanai kosher? Is it the fact that you're having an unusual intention that would usually passel it if you would have it in the right time? But over here, in the wrong time, any other day of the year, having a kavana that makes it passel actually kashers it? Or no, it's not about having a different kavana that would usually passel it. You have to have in mind that it's for Korban shlamim. When you have in mind for Korban shlamim, then it'll make it kosher. But just the fact that you have another kavana that would usually passel it is not enough. So Amar Rav Papa, Amrita l'shmaite kamei Rava. I said the following idea regarding this question in front of Rava, that Hayil v'shini kaidish paisle bizmanai. When you have in mind something that is shini kaidish, instead of thinking that it's for Korban Pesach, you're having in mind that it's for Korban shlamim. So it makes it pasul when you bring it in the right time. V'shini baile and paisle bizmanai. And if you have in mind that you're shechting it for the wrong owner, the wrong person, it also makes it possible when you bring it in the right time. Ma'ashini kaidesh shepaisle bizmanai machshiroi la'achar zmanai. So when you have in mind for the wrong korban, for Korban shlamim, so when it's brought in out of Pesach, it's going to make it possible. But when you have that in mind in any other day of the year, it makes it kosher. Av shini bailim shepaisle bizmanai machshiroi la'achar zmanai. The same thing is also with the kavana of shechting it for the wrong owner. It makes it possible when it's brought in the right time, but it'll make it kosher when it's brought any other time. So this is the comparison that Rav Papa made. Just like Shini Kaidesh makes it kosher, Shini Bailam will also make it kosher. V'yam Ali, but Rav said to me, Loi, you can't make such a comparison. Im Amrit b'Shini Kaidesh, if he's talking about having an intention where you're thinking about a different korban, not Pesach, Shlamim. So here the Gemara is going to bring a few things to point out, 4 things that point out the strength of what this machshava accomplishes. Shkem psuloi begufay. Number 1, this is a psul that relates to the very identity of the korban itself. Your thought is that it's a korban shlamim, not a korban Pesach. That's one point. V'yashnoi ba'arba avedis. This is a kind of machshava that in any of the 4 avedis, which we mentioned before in the Mishnah, whether it's shchita, Kabbalas Adam, Hailacha, and Zrike, if you have this kavana, that it's not for the sake of the Korban Pesach, but for a shlamim, so it'll make it pasul, or it could make it kosher in the other days of the year. V'yashnoi la'acha misa. And this is also a kind of a psul that applies even after a person passes away. As Rashi explains, in a situation where a person passes away and his son is obligated to bring a korban that his father was supposed to bring. So if the son brings the korban and he shechts it shaloi lishma, so he has the responsibility to bring it again. So this psul of shaloi lishma applies even when a son, after you pass away, brings the korban. And the yashnoi b'tzibur kibiyachid. This is a kind of a psul that applies equally for a korban tzibur like for a korban yachid. However, on the other hand, the kavana, where you're thinking in your mind that you're bringing it for a different person, not for the rightful owner, this is much less of a psul. The aim psulei begufay. This is not a psul that relates to the very identity of the carbon itself. You're thinking that you're bringing it for the right carbon, however, for the wrong owner. So it's not as much as a psul. Ve'enoi ba'arba avedis. This is a kind of a psul that does not apply to all 4 avedis, as Rashi brings over here, that regarding all karbanis, the machshava, that you're bringing it for the wrong owner, is only during zrika, at the time when you're sprinkling the blood in the mizbeach, or doing any of the other avedis that we're speaking about over here, the 4 avedis, but you're thinking that I'm shechting it in order to sprinkle the blood on the mizbeach for a different person, not for this owner. So it has to be related only to the zrike, not by all 4 avedis. Rashi does point out that by Korban Pesach, by any aved that you do, if you think for a different owner, it's going to be pasul. But by all other karbanis, it's only by the zrike. So we see that this is a kind of a psul that is not as severe. Ve'enoi la'achamisa. This is a kind of machshava that will not affect the carbon if it's not your son that's bringing it, if it's not the person himself. And ve'enoi kibitzibur kibiyachid. This is not a kind of machshava that could passel a carbon tzibur like a carbon yachid. The carbon tzibur belongs to all the Klal Yisrael, so there is no concept of shinui bailim. So what do we see from here? That the psul of shaloi lishma is a much stronger psul than when a person thinks a machshava that he's bringing it for a different owner, shinui bailim. Now the Gemara clarifies, we pointed out 4 things over here to distinguish between these 2 kinds of machshavas, but the Gemara will say not necessarily are all 4 true. Va'af al gav the tarti lav dafke. 2 of the points that we made are not necessarily true, as the Gemara will explain. Tarti mia dafke. 2 of the points, however, is definitely true that show that shini kaidesh, the shini of the machshava of the Pesach itself, Pesach to Shlamim, is much stronger than the shini bailim. So the Gemara explains the ma'ishna shini bailim. So now, what's the difference here? One of the first point that we pointed out was that by the shini of the machshava regarding the identity of the carbon, that's a psul in the guf of the carbon. Shini bailim, the Gemara said, is not a psul in the guf of the carbon. But the Gemara says, no, not necessarily. Because ma'ishna shini bailim. That's not considered to be a psul in the guf of the carbon itself. It's just a change in your intention. As far as the owner of the carbon is concerned, so it's a psul where you're having the wrong machshava, the wrong idea about who you're shechting it for. So we can say the same thing about shini kaidesh. Shini kaidesh nami psuloi machshava ba'al mehi. Even though this is a machshava that relates to the identity of the carbon, but still there's no actual psul in the carbon itself. This is still considered to be only a psul in your machshava. So they're both similar, that it's not a real psul in the guf of the carbon. So that distinction is not necessarily true. The sul, one of the distinctions we made before, is not necessarily true. Hada amar shini bailim ein elacha misa. So we mentioned before that if a son brings a carbon for his father and he has in mind the wrong owner, so then it's going to make it pasul at la'achar misa, so that it doesn't apply. But Rav Pinchas bereider Rav Ami da amar yesh shini bailim la'achar misa, that this psul of shini bailim does apply even la'achar misa, just like the machshava for the wrong carbon. So maya kalamema. So what are we going to say? So those 2 distinctions don't apply. But tarti miyas dafke nino. There are 2 things that we pointed out before that do apply. One was that the shini kaidesh applies by all 4 avedis, and the other one was that it's by carbon tzibur kibi yachid, and that does not apply by shini bailim. So what was Rav's question? Rav is saying you can't compare having a machshava regarding the identity of the carbon, whether it's a shlamim or a pesach, to having a machshava where you're thinking about a different owner. It doesn't affect the carbon in the same way. It's not as strong as a psul. So if you're bringing a carbon pesach any other day of the year, it won't necessarily affect it as strongly. So the Gemara says, Ela Marave, so therefore Rava Paskins, Pesach, Shashachtoi, B'shar Yemais Hashana, B'shini Bailim. A Pesach that was shechted on any of the days of the year, and you're thinking that you're bringing it for a different owner, Nase Kimi She'ein Loi Bailim Bizmanoi. It's like you shechted it in the right time, and you didn't shecht it for its owner, upasul. It's going to be pasul. In other words, the machshava of shini bailim will not be effective to kasher it. Adarab, it'll make it puzzle, just like that machshava that you have when you're bringing it in the right time. The only way you can be machsher a korban Pesach that's brought in the wrong time and any other day of the year is if you have a machshava that it's being brought as a korban shlomim. Then it becomes a korban shlomim and it's kosher. Zok the Mishnah. Shachtoi shalayla oichlav v'shalaylam nuyav. You shechte the korban Pesach. You had in mind that it's not for anybody that's going to eat it. Shalaylam nuyav, not for the people that were counted in the group for this korban Pesach. That's one of the unique things about the korban Pesach, which we'll learn about later here, that you have to have people that are counted for it. La'areilim, you shechted it having in mind that people that are not without a bris are going to eat from it, which are not allowed. L'tmeim, people that are tomei, so pasul. This machshava pasels the korban. La'oichlav v'shaloi la'oichlav, you shechting it for people that are going to eat it, and also people that are not going to eat it. Lemnuyav v'shaloi lemnuyav, for the people that are counted on the korban, and all the people that are not. L'mulim ula'areilim, people that have a bris, people that don't. L'tmeim u'l'tahayrim, people that are tomei, people that are tahir. Kosher. That it's going to be kosher. We had yesterday in the Gemara, Rashi explained it, that any time you shech the korban, and you're thinking that it's going to be eaten by somebody that is allowed to eat it, even if you also include someone that can't, as long as someone is going to be eating it, that's enough that the shechita is going to be kosher. Shachtoi kaidem chatzais, you shecht it before chatzais, pasul. Mishum shenema bein arbaim, the pasuk says the korban has to be brought bein arbaim. Shachtoi kaidem letomid, kosher. You shechted it before the korban tomid shal shachar, it's going to be kosher. Sorry, not the tomid shal shachar. Again, before the tomid shal bein arbaim, that is, it's going to be kosher. Even though we learned the very first Mishnah of this Pedic, and the Gemara before explained that we learn out from the Psukim that the korban Pesach is supposed to be brought after the korban Tamid. But B'di Yeved, if you shechted it bore the korban Tamid, it's going to be kosher. Ubulvad sheyehei acher memares b'damai. So you should have someone take the blood of the korban Pesach that has to be sprinkled on the Mizbeach, so you should keep that blood, mix the blood that it shouldn't get congealed. Ad sheyizarek hatamid. And first you do the zrika of the blood of the korban tamid, and then afterwards you do the zrika of the korban Pesach. V'im nizrak kosher. However, even if that was not done, and the zrika of the korban Pesach was done before the tamid, then it's still going to be kosher. So this whole halacha that the korban Pesach has to be brought before the tamid is only l'chatchila. B'diyeved, or after the tamid it is. The fact that it has to be brought after the tamid is all l'chatchila. B'diyeved, if it was brought before the tamid, it's still going to be kosher. Tana Rabbana, we learned in the Braisa. Keitzad shaloi la'oichlav. What's an example that you shech the korban for people that are not eating it? L'shum chayla, for a person that's ill, he can't eat even a kazayis from the korban. Or l'shum zokin, same thing, a person that's old that can't eat from it. Keitzad shaloi lemnuyav. What's considered to be that you shechted for people that are not counted on this korban? Nimnu olav chaburazu. There's one group that is counted for this korban. V'shachtei l'shem chabura cheres, and he's shechting it, thinking that it's going to be for a different group, for a different korban Pesach. We know animili. From where do we know this halacha that if you shecht it not for the people that are eating it, and not for the people of this group, that it's going to be pasul? The Tana Rabbanon. So we learned in the Braisa. The pasuk says b'michsas. B'michsas literally means you count people on it. You count people on this korban. Melamed she'ena Pesach nishchat ela l'menuyav. You have to have the people that are counted for it and shechted for their sake. Yachol shachta shaloi l'menuyav. So now I would think that if you shechted it, not for those people that are counted for this korban, so yehei ka'over ala mitzvah. You are over on a mitzvah where the Torah says that you have to shecht it for them, counted on this korban, but for kosher, it's still going to be kosher. It doesn't make the korban pasul. Talmud Loimar, the pasuk says twice. It says b'michsas, and then in the same pasuk afterwards it says tochoisu alaseh, that you should be counted for this lamb. So the Torah wrote it twice. Hakosov shana olav la'akiv. So the Torah writes it twice by kotchim. The rule always is whenever the Torah writes something twice, it says that it must be done, and if it's not, then it's going to be pasul. So this is from where we see that if you shechted shaloi lemenuyav, then it's going to be pasul. Rabbi learns out the drasha from here a bit differently. Lashon sursi hu. This word b'michsas and tachaisu, it's a lashon sursi. Lashon sursi is some kind of a dialect of Aramaic. In one place, Rashi actually says that this is the lashon of Talmud Yerushalmi, which is also Aramaic, but different than the Aramaic of our Gemara. So he says that this word michsas is a word in Aramaic, and what it actually means is to slaughter, to shech the carbon. So the word b'michsas has two meanings. It means to count, to have the people counted on the carbon, but it also means to shech the carbon. So ka'adam sh'aymelech haveiroi, the way it's used in the language in Aramaic is kaisli tlezeh, shecht for me this lamb. So the same thing over here, the pasuk is saying b'michsas, that you have to have the people counted, that when you shecht the carbon, you have to have in mind those people that are counted for this carbon. So Taisus over here says, Rebbe is not arguing with the Tanakama. Rebbe is just adding that this halacha that you have to have in mind for the people that are counted for the carbon was only said at the time of the shechita. There's other parts of the avodah of the carbon, then that kavanah doesn't matter. It's at the time of the shechita. Says the Gemara weiter, the Braisa weiter, Ashkechan shaloi limnuyav. So I see over here the source that if you had in mind for the people that are not counted of this carbon, it will be puzzle. From where do I know that if you have in mind for the people that are not eating this, so how do you know that it's going to be puzzle? Makra, the pasuk says, Ish lefi achloi tachaisu. It says, Ish lefi achloi. The people that are going to be eating it. Tachaisu, you should check the carbon. Iskish eichlin leminoyin. We compare the people that are eating to the people that are counted on this carbon, that you have to have in mind for the people that there's going to be people eating it, and they could eat it, not a chayla or a zaken that can't eat it, or anyone else that can't eat it, just like it has to be for the group that was counted for this carbon. Okay, now the Gemara brings a machlokes of Rabba and of Chisda. According to some Rishonim, you go to here in the Gemara Itmer, like it usually says before it starts an argument of Amayraim. Shachtai lemulen, you shechte the carbon Pesach for people that have a bris and people that are able to eat from the carbon. Almenas sheyiskapru boya reilim bezrika. But then you're also thinking that yiskapru refers to the zrika. Even though by carbon Pesach there is really no kapara, but usually the term yiskapru by all karbanis is the zrika. That's the main kapara of a carbon. So over here what the Gemara means is, al menashe yiskapru by areilim bezrika, the person was thinking that at the time of the zrika will be done for areilim, for people that are areilim that can't eat from the carbon. So the question is this going to be kosher or not? Rav Chisda says posel. Carbon is going to be posel. Rabba says kosher. Carbon will be kosher. Rav Chisda Amar pasol. Chisda says it's pasol. Yesh machsheves areilim bezrika. His opinion is having this machshava that you're going to be shechting it for areilim at the time of zrika pasels the carbon pesach. Rabba Amar kosher. Ein machsheves areilim bezrika. This machshava of for areilim is only an issue by the shechita. It's not an issue by the zrika. By the zrika, there's no issue. The zrika is not made for the eating. The shechita is what makes it fit for eating. So by the shechita, you have to have in mind that it's done for the people who are going to eat it and not for areilim. But by zrika, this is not an issue.
He's also doing it for people who have a bris already. No? He said that
the shechita. So again, the question is the shechita, he shechted it for people that have a bris. Right. But he's thinking that the zrika is going to be done for people that are areilim that did not have a bris. So the question is that passel the carbon or not. Truth is that there's many opinions in the Rishonim how to learn the pshat in this Gemara here. Just mention two of them because really we had in the Gemara before, and you see in the Gemara later, and all the time the Gemara says that when it comes to the zrika, the machshava regarding who is going to be eating it is irrelevant. It's only by the shechita where the machshava regarding who is going to be eating it and the right people are going to be eating it is relevant. That's what it seems pretty clear from the Gemara. And it's based on the pasuk that we mentioned before, that it says, Ish lefi achloi tachaisu. That only when it comes to the tachaisu, which is another word that's used for shechita, is it relevant to have the right kavana for the shechita. So why is the Gemara suddenly here having a shaila regarding the machshava that you had by the zrika, that you're going to do the zrika for people that can't eat it, areilim that can't eat it, and there's a machlokes here whether that's going to make the carbon possible or not. So there's many opinions in the Rishonim. One opinion is that the Gemara is holding, the argument here in the Gemara is specifically regarding areilim, not regarding any of the other categories of people that can't eat. If a person is going to do the zrika, having in mind that tmeim, or a chayle, or a zakin, or any of the other categories that can't eat the carbon, should be eating the carbon, it's not going to affect the carbon. Specifically regarding areilim, is where the Gemara has a question. As we'll see in continuation of the Gemara. This is the pshat of the Rambam in the Gemara, perhaps Rashi as well. Taisvis has a few pshatim. Taisvis makes another distinction. Taisvis says, when you talk about having the wrong kavana by zrika, there's two different possibilities how that happens. Either while you're doing the actual zrika, then you're having the kavana for people that can't eat it. In that case, for sure, your wrong kavana doesn't have any effect because the zrika is not related to the achila. It's only the shchita that makes it possible to eat. But then, what the Gemara here is talking about, not at the time of the zrika itself, you're having the kavana for people that can't eat it. At the time of the shchita, you're thinking that, when you're doing the shchita, you're thinking that when I'm going to be doing the zrika will be for people that can't eat it. That's where the Gemara has the shaila. Maybe since right now you're doing the shchita and you're having the wrong kavana when you're going to be doing this rike, so maybe it'll make the carbon possible. That's the Gemara's question here. There's more opinions, but those are two opinions how to learn pshat in this Gemara. Zok the Gemara, Omar Rabbe. So Rabbe brings a pretty lengthy braisa here, that will be a source for his opinion. Minah minallah, what's the source for my opinion? So the braisa says as follows: the Tanya will learn in the braisa, Yochel Yifsel B'nei Chabura Habani Mai. I would think that if you have an oral, you have a person that does not have a bris, and he's part of a group for the Korban Pesach, so I would think that he passels the entire group of the Korban Pesach. Right? The Kayin is shechting the Korban for this group, and amongst the group is one person that's an oral. I would think that passels the whole Korban Pesach. It's not V'dinu, but there's a Kal V'chomer, or there's a comparison that you could make to teach me that that's not the case. Why? Hoyol va'arla paiselis. If you're an oral, so that passels the carbon. If you have in mind that you're shechting it for a person that's an oral, that passels the carbon. V'tumah paiselis. And tumah also passels. If you have in mind you're shechting it for people that are tumah, it also makes it passel. So let's compare the two. Ma tumah, just like the halacha by tumah is, le'asaba miktsas tumah kechol tumah. I don't compare a case where you're shechting for some people that are tumah to a place where you're shechting it for all people that are tamei. Like we learned in the Mishnah. What does the Mishnah say? That if you're shechting it for tmeim and tahirim, so then it's fine. So the same thing also, af arla le'asaba miktsas arla kachal arla. The same thing when it comes to if there's one person that's an adol in the group, so the fact that there's one person doesn't make it possible. There's other people that are to have a bris, so therefore it's going to be kosher. That's one svara you could say. So you compare it to tumah. It's going to be okay. Oh, says the Braise, klach lederech zu, or maybe you can go to a different direction. You could compare this case to something else. Hoyol va'arla paiselis. An adol can't eat the carbon. If you're having in mind for an adol, it passels. Zman paisel. If you have in mind to eat the carbon out of its allotted time, it also makes it passel. This is the concept of pigel. When you have in mind to eat it after the time, so it becomes passel as well. Ma zman, what's the halacha by pigel? If you have in mind to eat it in the wrong time. Asaba miktsazman kecholzman. Even if you have in mind just to eat one kezayis out of its time, even if you're going to eat the rest of it all in the right time, but if you just have in mind to eat one kezayis out of its time, so then it makes the whole thing possible. So af arla, perhaps I could say the same thing and apply this also by arla. Asaba miktsas arla kechol arla. I would compare this case to the machshava shaloi bizmanai to say that it would be possible, even if there's just one oral amongst the group that you're having in mind to shecht for him. So this is the question here. What should we compare this case to? Should we compare it to tumah, or should we compare it to having in mind to eat it shaloi bizmanai? So the Braisa continues, it says, "Nu so nira lemidaime." Let's see this case where there's one oral in the group. What is it more compared to? Is it more compared to tumah, or is it more compared to shechting it, having in mind that you can eat it shaloi bizmanai? Don in davar. So the Gemara here, so the Braisa here actually says there's a svara that it's daime, it's compared to this and it's compared to that. Don in davar. Should I compare and say I compare adol to tumah? This is a kind of psul that's not relevant by all karbanis. Midavar from another psul, which is a psul of a tameh, which is not relevant by all other karbanis. As Rashi here says, by all karbanis, what's the halacha? If a person that doesn't have a bris, or a person that's tameh, sends a carbon to the Beis HaMikdash, he can't himself go into the Beis HaMikdash, but if he sends a carbon to the Beis HaMikdash, the carbon is brought for him. It's a good carbon. Only by carbon Pesach, a person that's tameh or a person that did not have a bris can't bring the carbon. So in that sense, Adol and Tumah are similar. They're both a unique psul just by a Korban Pesach. But I should not prove anything from the psul of having in mind that you're eating it not in the right time. That's the concept of pigul by all korbanos. So why should I compare to there? That's one svara, why these two are similar. Or I can say it in a different way. I should compare something where there's no heter for this. An adol could never bring a Korban Pesach. There's never a heter for this. The same thing also regarding shchita, having in mind shaloi bizmanai. There's never a time that this is going to be kosher. There's no heter for that. If you have the intention shaloi bizmanai, it's always possible. But don't prove it from the case of tumah shehutra meklala. One of the unique things about the psul of tumah by Korban Pesach is there is a heter for this sometimes. When is a heter for that? When you have a tzibur that's tamei. If most of Klal Yisrael is tamei, you can bring the Korban Pesach. But tumah hutra b'tzibur. So why should I compare adol to tumah if they're not the same? So bekitzer, after all of these svaras, the Brais over here has a suffix. In a case where you're shechting for mulim, for people that have a bris, and an adol as well, is it going to be kosher or not? Talmud Loima, the Brais concludes, therefore we have a pasuk where it says Zeis. What does the pasuk say? So you have the pasuk here on the side. It says Zeis chukas ha-pasach kol ben nechor lo yechol bay. So you learn out from Zeis. Now it's not very clear exactly what you learn out from Zeis. So the Gemara explains right now. My Zeis. What exactly do you learn out from Zeis? Are you going to say you learn out from Zeis? The kula arla pasla. Only if all the people you're shechting for are arelim, then it's going to be pasal. Miktsasa loy pasla, but if only a few of them or one of them is an arla, it will not make it pasal. So you learn that out from the word Zeis. Zeis chukas ha-pesach. Hi, mivachol adol nafke. You learn it out from v'chol adol nafke, meaning only if everyone, kol adol, only if everyone you're shechting for is an adol, then the Pesach is pasal. That's where you learn it out from. So that's really what the Brais meant to say. From the pasuk v'chol adol, that's where you learn out that only if you're shechting for everyone that's an adol, it's pasal. So why did the Brais say Zeis? What did the Brais mean by this? Ella lav hachi katani. This is how you have to read the Braisa. Talmud loymar v'chol adol kula arla pasla miktsasa loy pasla. That only if all of the people that you're shechting for are arelim, then it'll be pasal. Not if there's 1, 2, or 3. That's not going to make it pasal. And then when the Braisa brings the pasuk Zeis, what's the pshat in the continuation of the Braisa Zeis? V'chi teime, if you're going to think to say hu adin lezrike, just like this psul applies when you shech the korban. So the same, the kula are so hu adin lezrike. The same would apply also by zrike as well. The kula arla miya pasla, that if when you sprinkle the blood, you're thinking that you're shechting it only for people that are arelim, that it'll also make it pasal. Talmud loymar zeis. So therefore the pasuk writes a miya zeis, only this. B'shchite hu de kula arla miya pasla. If when you shech the pasuk you're thinking you're going to shech it for arelim, then it passes it. Avol zrike, but when you sprinkle the blood, afila kula arla nami loy pasla. Even if you're thinking that you're shechting it only for people that are arelim, it's not going to passel the korban. That's the conclusion of Rabbe's pshat in this Braisa. So Rabbe is showing you clearly that the pshat in this Braisa is that the psul of shechting for arelim only applies by shchita, but by zrike not. So even if b'shas shchita, according to one of the pshatim that I said before from the Rishonim, even if b'shas shchita you're having in mind that the zrika is going to be done for arelim, it's not going to passel. That's the miyat of Zeis. Now, v'chi teime, if you're going to argue and say, my kula de zrika, what is it that we find about zrika that it's more lenient, that having the wrong intention that you're shechting it for arelim will not passel the korban? The ein machsheves oichlin bezrika, because we have a rule that the machshava, thinking that you're shechting it for the wrong people that are going to eat it, by zrika that's irrelevant, that does not passel the korban. So therefore, thinking that you're going to shecht it for arelim does not passel the korban. Passel the korban. This is Rabbe's interpretation of this Braisa. But Rav Chisda's opinion is Adarabba. Close the door there. Dalo there. Rav Chisda's opinion is Adarabba. No, learn the pshat in the Braisa in the opposite. Rabbe was learning pshat in this Braisa that by zrike the machshava for arelim does not passel at all. Rav Chisda says in the opposite. Let's see. Leidach kise. Talmud Loima, this is how you have to read the Braisa. The pasuk is teaching me, v'chal aral, kula arla pasla. If when you shech the carbon, you're thinking that you're shechting it only for arelim it passels, miksasa loy pasla. If there's only a few arelim in the group, it will not passel. Aval zrike, when it comes to the zrike, we're going to be more machmer, we'll be more stringent. Afila miksasa nami pasla. If you're going to sprinkle the blood, and you're thinking that even for a few people in the group there are arelim, it'll passel it. Not like by the shechita that it's only if they're all arelim. V'chi teime. Hu adin lizrike the ad ikke kula arla loy pasla. If you'd say no, let's compare zrike to shchita, that only if you had in mind that they're all going to be arelim, then it's going to be pasel. Talmud leima zais. When the Braisa says zais, the zais is learned not for leniency, not lakula. The zais is learned lachumra, to say that by the zrike, even if you're having in mind just for one adl, it'll be pasel. Shchita, hu de miktsasa pasla. By shchita, if there's a few arelim, it won't be pasel. Aval zrike, afilu miktasa pasla. By the zrike, even if there's one or two arelim or whatever number, even if it's not all of them, it's going to be pasel. Chi teime my chumrei de zrike. Why is zrike more stringent? That I say that even if there's just one adl, it's going to be pasel. The answer is the loy mikva pigul ela bezrike. There's a unique stringency that you find regarding zrike, regarding the halacha of pigul. So the halacha of pigul is what was mentioned before when you have in mind that you're shechting something shaloi bizmane. But as Rashi here explains, this idea of le mikva pigul or le mekayim pigul ela bezrike, Rashi says, what this means is that by pigul is a very interesting halacha. That only the status of pigul is very unique, because if you eat from a carbon that's pigul, you chayev kodesh. If you have any other wrong intention and then you eat from that carbon, you're not chayev kodesh. By pigul, the halacha actually is, if you have a machshava of pigul, but then in any of the other avedis, you also had a different machshava that passes it, it removes the status of pigul. It could only be pigul if you only had that machshava of pigul alone, not any other machshava. When is that determined? That's determined by the zrike. If you had a wrong machshava of pigul, and then you came to the zrike, and there was no other machshava that you had other than the pigul, so then this pigul status remains, and if you eat from it, you'll be chayev kodesh. If at the time of zrike, you had a different machshava other than the pigul, so then it removes this pigul status. So this is a unique chumrah that you see by the zrike, that after the zrike is done, it establishes and confirms the psul of the pigul that you'll be chayev kodesh for this. So therefore, Rav Chisda says, Adarabba, for the zrike it's more chomer, and even if you have kavana from mitzvahs arelim, it'll be pasel. This is the machlokes of Rabbi and Rav Chisda. The what?
What about pigul only by zrike?
So then also the same thing. Zrike is the last of the four avedis that makes it pigul. There's shchita, kabbalah, halacha, and zrike. So pigul is the last place where we determine if it's going to be pigul or not. So that's the special chumrah that you find by pigul. This machlokes of Rabbi and of Chisda will be continuation of the Gemara Mitzvah. We'll see tomorrow.